You'd think being a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force would earn you a little respect at home. But in my family, it barely got me a nod. I'm Lauren Pierce, logistics officer, 15 years into service. I can coordinate humanitarian missions across continents, manage 50 people under pressure, and still get every crate of supplies exactly where it needs to go. But none of that mattered to my parents in Texas. To them, I was just the serious one. The one who never got married. The one who chose work over life. My sister Amber, though, she was the star. Beautiful, fun, spontaneous. My parents talked about her like she'd walked straight out of a magazine cover. Amber lights up a room, my mom used to say. Lauren just organizes it. They weren't entirely wrong. I'm not the life of any party. I'm the one who makes sure the power's working, the food's hot, and the generator won't die halfway through the night. It's not glamorous, but it keeps the world running. Amber, on the other hand, had never worked a steady job. She'd floated through relationships, moved back home twice, and somehow still managed to be the golden child. That summer, I was stationed at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. We'd just wrapped a chaotic logistics exercise, and I decided to take a few days of leave to visit my parents in Texas. When I walked in the door, Amber was already there, smiling, radiant, and as dramatic as ever. She hugged me like we were long-lost best friends. Lauren. You look official, she said, eyeing my uniform bag. Still living that soldier life, huh? Still keeping the country running, I said. At dinner, she took over every conversation. My parents laughed at her stories. My father kept telling me, you should smile more, Lauren. You'd look prettier if you laughed like your sister. I wanted to remind him that I spent the last week coordinating aid drops for storm victims while Amber was probably drinking cocktails at noon, but I bit my tongue. The next afternoon, Amber showed up at my door looking pale and frantic. She had her 5-year-old son, Noah, with her. He was a quiet little boy with sandy hair and big brown eyes, always polite, always holding a toy car in his hand. Lauren, Amber said, voice trembling, I need a favor. It's serious. I motioned her inside. What happened? She sat on my couch, clutching Noah's backpack like it was a life preserver. The doctors found something. Noah's sick. Really sick. My stomach dropped. What kind of sick? She swallowed hard. They think it's a blood disorder. They said, maybe 6 months. For a second, the room went silent except for Noah's soft humming as he played with his toy car. Amber, have you seen a specialist? I have. It's bad, Lauren. I can't handle it right now. I need time to think. Can you keep him for a few days? I just need to breathe. It wasn't even a question in my mind. Of course, I said. He can stay as long as you need. Amber hugged me, whispered. You're saving me, and left before I could ask anything else. That night, I made Noah a sandwich. He only ate the bread and pushed away everything else. You don't like turkey? I asked. He shook his head. Mommy says I get sick if I eat too much. I figured she was just being careful because of his condition. 3 days passed. No call. No text. Then 5. Then a week. By day 7, I drove to Amber's house. The driveway was empty. The curtains were gone. The place looked abandoned. I knocked anyway. Amber? It's me. Nothing. Only silence. Inside, the air felt wrong, too still, too clean. I found Noah sitting in an armchair, hugging a pillow. He didn't even look surprised to see me. Aunt Lauren, he whispered, Mommy went on a trip. On the coffee table, I noticed a folded piece of paper. My name on it. I opened it, hands shaking. Lauren, I'm sorry. I had to go. Ethan and I are together now. We're in love. I can't take Noah with me, it's not the right environment. You're better at this. Please don't try to find us. Amber. I read it twice. My brain couldn't catch up with my eyes. Ethan. My Ethan. He'd been my classmate at the Air Force Academy, my closest friend, the man I almost married before our careers sent us different ways. And now he was with her. I sat down on the cold floor, staring at Noah. Where's Mommy? I asked quietly. He just looked at me, confused, small hands gripping that toy car. I took a deep breath. My whole world was collapsing, but his world was gone entirely. It's okay, I told him, forcing a steady tone. You're safe now. He nodded and climbed into my lap. The kid didn't cry. He just leaned against me, exhausted. That's when it hit me, my sister didn't just betray me, she abandoned her own son. And that's the kind of betrayal you don't forgive. You just survive it. If you've ever felt like the person you trusted most turned their back on you, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you love stories about family, betrayal, and quiet revenge, make sure you subscribe, it helps more than you think. Noah fell asleep in my arms, and the only sound in that silent house was his slow breathing. Outside, the Texas wind rattled the windows. Inside, everything I thought I knew about family had just changed forever. The next morning, I packed a bag for Noah and drove him back to my place in Montgomery. I didn't talk much on that drive. I didn't trust myself to. Every time I thought about that letter, my chest tightened. The handwriting, the cheerful loops of her name at the bottom, it didn't look like guilt. It looked like relief. Noah sat in the back seat, holding his toy car, watching the clouds move. I caught him in the mirror a few times. He looked too calm for a 5-year-old whose world had just vanished. That scared me more than tears would have. When we got home, I made him pancakes. He didn't eat much. He kept saying his mom would be back soon. I didn't correct him. I just nodded and said, "You can stay here as long as you need." Later that day, I drove to the police station. I didn't want drama, I wanted confirmation. The officer told me there wasn't much they could do. "It's not a crime to leave," he said. "She's the mother. If she left the child with you willingly, it's not abandonment in the legal sense." I wanted to scream. But instead, I said, "So, she can disappear with my ex-boyfriend and dump her sick kid on me, and you're telling me that's fine?" He gave me that bureaucratic shrug. "Ma'am, it happens more than you think." That was the moment it hit me, no one was coming to fix this. No knock on the door, no social worker, no apology letter. It was just me and a kid I didn't ask for but couldn't turn away from. The next few weeks were a blur of survival. I juggled my military duties and motherhood like they were two parts of a mission I never trained for. My mornings started at 4:30 a.m., emails, logistics reports, then packing Noah's lunch. Evenings were for cartoons, soup, and exhaustion. He'd fall asleep on the couch, clutching that same toy car, and I'd sit across the room staring at the wall, wondering how I'd become the cleanup crew for someone else's disaster. One night, my mother called. "Lauren, have you heard from your sister?" "Yes, Mom. She's gone." There was a pause. "Gone? Gone where?" "With Ethan." The silence stretched, long and heavy. Then she sighed. "You know, she was always impulsive. Don't make it a big deal." I almost laughed. "Don't make it a big deal." "She left her child," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She left him to die." "Well," my mother said, "you always liked taking care of people. Maybe this is your purpose." That was the moment I stopped expecting understanding from anyone. At work, I kept my face straight, my tone calm. Military professionalism hides a lot of broken hearts. But when I looked at Noah, I saw a kind of fear I couldn't ignore. His hands trembled when he held his fork. He wouldn't eat anything except white bread, strawberry jelly, and bananas. He refused vegetables like they were poison. One evening, I sat across from him at the dinner table. "Noah," I asked softly, "What did mommy feed you at home?" He shrugged. "Sometimes crackers. Sometimes cereal." "Did she ever cook for you?" He shook his head. "She said the stove makes her tired." I pressed my lips together. My sister, the drama queen, who could spend hours curling her hair but never 10 minutes to boil pasta. I looked at the thin little boy in front of me and thought, you didn't just abandon him. You starved him. I started tracking everything, what he ate, how much he slept, how often he smiled. I wrote it all down like a mission log. That's how soldiers survive, we collect data when we can't control chaos. 2 weeks after Amber's disappearance, I got an email from HR at the base. "Ma'am, you've been requested to attend the logistics review board on Tuesday." Normally, that would be routine. But my body felt like it was running on fumes. I hadn't slept properly in days. I stared at the screen, wondering how I was going to keep functioning. That night, Noah woke up crying for the first time. "Mommy's gone," he whispered. "She said I was too much work." My throat closed up. I pulled him close and said, "She was wrong. You're not too much. You're just mine now." The next morning, I called in a favor from a base medic, Captain Moore, a friend I trusted. I told him I needed someone to take a look at my nephew off the record. He checked Noah over, frowned, and said, "He's underweight, but I don't see anything life-threatening. You should get him to a pediatrician, though. Something's off." Those words stayed with me, something's off. When we got home, I found a small envelope in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was from Amber. "Don't hate me, Lauren. I just couldn't handle it anymore. He's better off with you. Take care of him." No apology. No explanation. No mention of Ethan. I sat at the kitchen table holding that note. Noah was coloring on the floor beside me, humming softly to himself. His drawings were all planes and stars. He'd seen me on base enough to know airplanes meant safety. I wondered if he'd ever feel safe again. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey. I don't drink often, but that evening, the burn felt earned. I looked out the window at the quiet Alabama street. The world outside was calm, indifferent, steady. Inside, mine had been flipped upside down. I kept replaying her words, "He's better off with you." She was right. But that didn't make her less cruel. When I finally went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the steady breathing from Noah's room. Somewhere between exhaustion and anger, I made a decision: if Amber wanted to disappear, fine. But I wasn't going to let her child disappear with her. This wasn't a favor anymore. It was a mission. And I'd never failed a mission in my life. The next morning started before dawn. My alarm didn't even need to go off anymore, my body had learned the rhythm. Coffee, boots, uniform, hair tied back tight. But now, between those steps, there was one more task: wake up a 5-year-old boy who didn't belong to me but had no one else. Noah slept curled up like a cat at the edge of the bed. I touched his shoulder gently. "Morning, champ," I said. He blinked, dazed, and muttered, "Can I stay home?" "You are home," I said, trying to sound lighter than I felt. At the base, I turned into someone else, the efficient officer, calm and precise. But when I clocked out, I turned into a beginner mother trying to figure out how to keep a child alive and emotionally intact. It was like switching from battlefield to nursery every 12 hours. I tried to build order. Kids like structure, right? I made charts for meals, sleep, and vitamins. He ignored most of them. He'd pick at food and whisper that his tummy hurt. I took him to the base medic again. Moore said, "He's malnourished, Lauren. You gotta feed him real meals, not kid snacks." "I do," I said. "He refuses." "Then make him eat." I wanted to laugh. As if commanding troops and convincing a traumatized 5-year-old were remotely the same thing. At night, I'd sit at my desk, reports in one pile and medical pamphlets in another. Logistics planning had always been about control, numbers, routes, outcomes. Parenting was the opposite, chaos disguised as love. Still, I treated it like deployment. Mission, stabilize Noah. Weekends were harder. The house felt too quiet, like it was waiting for Amber to walk in and take responsibility again. Every time the phone rang, a small part of me hoped it was her. It never was. My father called once, mostly to complain. "Your mother says you're still playing house with that boy," he said. "I'm raising him," I answered. "Well, don't expect her to thank you. That's Amber's mess." "She's my sister," I said. "Then maybe you should have stopped her before she ruined herself." I bit down on the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I'd learned to hold back words sharper than bullets. Later that week, Noah came home from preschool with a note. The teacher wanted to talk. Apparently, he didn't speak much in class. "He just sits there," she said. "He's polite, but distant." I nodded. I understood that kind of silence. That night, I sat beside him as he drew on the kitchen table. "Your teacher says you're quiet," I said softly. He kept coloring. "Kids don't like me." "Why not?" "I don't know. I think I'm weird." I smiled faintly. "You're not weird, kid. You're observant. That's different." He looked up. "Are you weird too?" "All soldiers are," I said. "We just hide it better." He laughed, a tiny giggle that cracked something open in me. It was the first sound of happiness I'd heard from him. Over time, I learned how to navigate his moods. He was cautious, always watching, as if the world might disappear again if he blinked too long. I knew that feeling. We both lived like people who expected abandonment. One night, I found him in the living room, staring out the window. "What are you doing up?" I asked. He pointed to the sky. "Mommy said she'd come back when the stars looked right." I crouched beside him. "How do they look tonight?" He squinted. "Not right yet." I nodded. "Then it's just us for now." He leaned against me, small and warm. "That's okay," he said. "You make good soup." That one sentence did something no medal ever had. It made me feel like I was enough. At work, people started noticing I looked tired. One sergeant joked, "Ma'am, you coordinate disaster relief but can't coordinate bedtime?" "Exactly," I said. "You try putting a 5-year-old to bed who thinks sugar is a food group." They laughed. I laughed too, but inside I knew I was balancing on fumes. Still, the soldier in me refused to quit. I handled it like every tough mission: plan, adapt, survive. On a Friday evening, I picked Noah up from daycare. He was sitting alone while other kids played tag. His teacher whispered, "He's gentle. Too gentle." I knelt beside him. "Want to get ice cream?" His eyes lit up. It was the first real spark I'd seen in weeks. We went to a small diner near the base. He picked strawberry, of course. Halfway through, he looked up and said, "You're not like Mommy." "No," I said quietly. "I'm not." "You don't yell." "I save that for people who deserve it." He smiled, pink ice cream smeared across his chin. It was messy and perfect. When we got home, I tucked him in and sat beside the bed. He was drifting off when he murmured, "Will Mommy ever come back?" I hesitated. "Maybe. But if she doesn't, I'm still here." His eyes stayed closed, but he whispered, "Okay." I watched him sleep and realized something had shifted. I wasn't just keeping a promise anymore, I was building a life. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm again. For once, it didn't feel like duty. It felt like purpose. The sun was just rising over Montgomery, pale gold spilling across the street. I brewed coffee, packed Noah's lunch, and checked my emails. Then I caught sight of the fridge where his drawings were taped: airplanes, stars, and one stick-figure woman in uniform holding hands with a little boy. Under it, he'd written in shaky letters, "Me and Mom." I stared at it for a long moment. It didn't matter that it wasn't biologically true. It was real enough for both of us. Outside, a car engine started somewhere down the block. Inside, the sound of Noah's small footsteps echoed down the hallway. He ran into the kitchen, his hair messy and eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning, Mom," he said. And just like that, the mission had a new name, family. The first real sign that something didn't add up came one afternoon at the playground. It was late summer in Alabama, the kind of humid day where the air feels like soup. Noah wanted to try the swings, so I pushed him gently, counting each arc. He laughed, his thin legs kicking at the air. But after only a few minutes, he went quiet. "Can we stop?" he said softly. "Already tired?" He nodded, eyes drooping. I helped him down, and by the time we reached the bench, he'd fallen asleep against my shoulder. That wasn't normal. No 5-year-old falls asleep mid-swing. My instincts kicked in, the same ones that keep soldiers alive. Something was wrong. That night, I wrote down everything I'd noticed: fatigue, limited diet, pale skin, dark circles. I wasn't a doctor, but I knew how to investigate patterns. The more I looked, the less sense Amber's story made. The next morning, I called the hospital she'd mentioned months ago. "Hi, this is Lauren Pierce," I said. "I'm calling to confirm a pediatric patient, Noah Pierce, diagnosed with a blood disorder." The nurse on the other end hesitated. "When was he seen?" "About 6 months ago, maybe more." "Ma'am, I'm sorry, we have no record of that name." My stomach dropped. I hung up without another word. For the rest of that day, my mind spun. Maybe Amber used a different hospital. Maybe she lied about the diagnosis. The thought hit me like a punch: what if he was never sick at all? That evening, I drove Noah to the city hospital. "We're going on a little trip," I told him, trying to sound casual. "Like a fun trip?" "Not exactly," I said. "But there'll be stickers." Dr. Evans was the kind of pediatrician you wish you met sooner: calm, kind eyes, sharp mind. She listened as I explained everything: the note, the diet, the fatigue, the missing records. She didn't interrupt. She just nodded, taking notes. "All right," she said finally. "Let's run some tests. Basic panel first, and we'll go from there." Noah was brave through it all. He winced when the needle went in but didn't cry. I squeezed his hand, pretending I was steady. The waiting room was quiet except for the hum of vending machines. I stared at a poster about childhood nutrition, feeling like someone was peeling away everything I thought I knew. An hour later, Dr. Evans came back. Her expression wasn't neutral anymore, it was grim but certain. "Lauren," she said gently, "Noah doesn't have a terminal blood disorder. He doesn't have any blood disorder at all." For a second, I couldn't process it. "So, he's not dying?" She shook her head. "No. But he is very sick. He's suffering from severe malnutrition and anemia. His vitamin levels are dangerously low." I stared at her. "Malnutrition? As in, he's starving?" She nodded. "His diet has been completely inadequate for a long time. Whoever was feeding him wasn't feeding him properly." The air in that room went still. Amber hadn't misdiagnosed him. She'd neglected him. Lied to me, manipulated me, and almost let her own son waste away just so she could walk away clean. My hands trembled. "Can this be reversed?" "With care, yes," Dr. Evans said. "But it'll take time and real food." On the drive home, I didn't speak. Noah hummed to himself in the back seat, holding the hospital sticker that said "Brave Patient." He looked so small, so trusting. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. When we got home, I opened Amber's old note again. "He's sick. He's dying. Take care of him." Every word was poison. That night, I didn't sleep. I cleaned the kitchen like a woman possessed, throwing out everything labeled kid snack and low sugar. I made soup from scratch for the first time in my life. Chicken broth, carrots, rice. It wasn't gourmet, but it was real food. When Noah came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, he said, "It smells weird." "It smells healthy," I said. "You're going to try it." He wrinkled his nose but sat down. I gave him a small bowl and waited. He took one hesitant bite, then another. Halfway through, he looked up. "It's okay," he admitted. That was enough. Over the next weeks, I turned my house into a recovery zone. Vitamins lined the counter. Grocery lists taped to the fridge. Every meal was logged like a military report: time, ingredients, results. Slowly, he started to change. His skin brightened, his energy returned. Sometimes, I caught myself watching him like I was seeing a miracle in slow motion. This child had been left to die by his own mother, but he was fighting his way back, with soup and love and stubbornness. One evening, he came running in from the yard, cheeks flushed, holding up a paper airplane. "Look, Mom. It flies." He said it so naturally I almost didn't catch it. I froze. "What did you call me?" He blinked, confused. "Mom." I felt my throat tighten. "Yeah," I said softly. "That's me." That night, I stood on the porch with my coffee, watching him sleep through the window. The cicadas buzzed, the air was thick with summer, and for the first time in months, I felt calm. Amber's lies had burned everything down. But in the ashes, something real was growing. Noah was alive. He was healing. And as strange as it sounded, so was I. Inside, the kitchen timer beeped, a reminder for his next meal. I turned off the porch light, went back in, and stirred the pot on the stove. The smell of broth filled the room, warm and steady. Some wars are fought with weapons. Others are fought with patience. And this one, I was going to win. The first time Noah finished a full meal, I nearly cried into the soup bowl. It had taken 3 weeks of trial and error, learning what he liked, what didn't make him gag, and what didn't bring back the fear in his eyes when food was set in front of him. I treated his recovery like a military operation. Each meal had a schedule, each symptom a report. The structure made sense to me. Soldiers survived by routine, and I figured maybe kids do too. Every morning started the same: eggs, toast, fruit, milk. He complained about all of it. I ignored the whining and smiled through his protests. By the second week, he was asking for seconds. His laugh started showing up more often too, soft at first, then louder, contagious. He'd follow me around the kitchen, asking what everything did. "What's this?" he'd ask, pointing at the blender. "That's what I use to sneak spinach into your smoothie," I'd say. He'd squint suspiciously. "Do I like spinach now?" "Apparently," I'd tell him. "You've been drinking it every morning for 2 weeks." That became our rhythm, quiet, simple, steady. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peace. I began leaving little motivational notes on the fridge for myself: feed the boy. File the reports. Sleep if you can. At work, I noticed something unexpected: my colleagues respected me more. They didn't know why, but they could sense a shift. The same discipline I used to keep troops moving was now keeping a child alive. The two roles weren't so different after all. One afternoon, Captain Moore stopped by my office. "Heard you've been running a one-woman mission at home," he said, dropping a coffee on my desk. I smirked. "Raising a kid is harder than managing a convoy." He laughed. "Yeah, but at least convoys don't cry when you serve vegetables." He wasn't wrong. That weekend, Noah and I went grocery shopping. It sounds mundane, but to me it felt like a checkpoint, proof he was strong enough for errands again. He held my hand as we walked through the aisles, pointing at everything colorful. "Can we get the red apples?" "We can get as many as you can carry." He grinned, stuffed 3 into the basket, then proudly carried them to the checkout like trophies. It was a small thing, but for a boy who once barely walked across the room without exhaustion, it was a victory. At home, I noticed he'd started drawing again. Planes, mostly, paper ones, crayon ones, even ones made out of cereal boxes. I asked him one night why he liked planes so much. "They don't stay stuck," he said simply. That answer sat heavy in my chest. I decided to get him out of the house more. The base had a family recreation day coming up, barbecue, games, flight demos. It wasn't exactly a quiet Saturday, but I thought it might help him feel normal again. When we arrived, a few of my colleagues waved. Noah stayed close, clutching my sleeve. The crowd was loud, but once the planes roared overhead, he looked up, eyes wide. "Are those yours?" he asked. "Sort of," I said. "They belong to all of us." He nodded, still watching, lips parted in awe. After the show, a few airmen stopped by to meet him. "So, you're the little guy who keeps the colonel busy?" one joked. Noah laughed nervously. I saw something in his face shift, confidence, maybe. Like for the first time, he realized he wasn't a burden. He belonged somewhere too. That night, when I tucked him in, he said, "I want to fly planes like you." I smiled. "You'd make a great pilot." "Do pilots eat spinach?" "All the time," I said. "It's part of the training." He rolled his eyes. "Then maybe I'll be logistics like you." I laughed, the sound surprising even me. For once, laughter didn't feel forced, it felt earned. The next few months passed quietly. His doctor was amazed at his progress. He gained weight, energy, and color. "This is a completely different child," she said during one appointment. "No," I corrected. "He's just finally allowed to be himself." At home, we had a new tradition. Every Sunday night, we cooked something together, spaghetti, chili, sometimes pancakes for dinner just because we could. He'd stir too fast, spill flour, and laugh until the dog barked. "Oops," he'd say. "Controlled chaos," I'd reply. "You're learning." He started calling me Mom all the time now, not just in slips. It became normal. The first time he said it in public, the cashier at the grocery store smiled. "You've got a sweet boy," she said. "I do," I answered, and it didn't feel like pretending anymore. Somewhere in that stretch of months, the bitterness faded. I still didn't know where Amber was, or Ethan. But they stopped haunting my every thought. I had enough to focus on right in front of me. One evening, I was sorting laundry when Noah came running down the hallway, holding a paper in his hand. "Look what I made." It was a drawing of us standing beside an airplane. He'd written our names in big block letters, Noah and Mom. I asked, "What's this for?" "It's for the fridge," he said, serious as a general. I laughed and stuck it right in the center, where I could see it every morning. The kid who once couldn't finish a meal now filled my house with drawings, laughter, and noise. Later that night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me. I looked at his drawing and realized, some battles aren't won by force. They're won by consistency. By every spoonful, every bedtime story, every small act of love that rebuilds what someone else tried to destroy. Outside, the Alabama night was still. I turned off the lights, walked to his room, and watched him sleep for a moment. His chest rose and fell evenly, no signs of sickness, no shadows of fear. I adjusted his blanket, whispered, "You did good today," and left the door slightly open so he wouldn't wake up to darkness. Then I made a cup of tea, leaned against the counter, and let out a long breath. The war might have started with betrayal, but peace, it turned out, could grow quietly between soup pots and bedtime stories. By the time Noah turned 8, our life had found its rhythm: early mornings, school drop-offs, base briefings, homework, and bedtime stories that usually ended with both of us asleep on the couch. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Stability, I learned, is its own kind of luxury. At Maxwell Air Force Base, I'd become known as the logistics officer who runs on caffeine and parental instinct. My team teased me, but they also respected me. The younger airmen came to me for advice, not just on missions but on life. I guess they saw something in me, discipline wrapped in patience. Still, balance wasn't easy. There were nights when I'd come home so exhausted I'd sit in the car for 5 minutes before walking inside. I'd look at the porch light, the small shadows of Noah's toys scattered across the yard, and remind myself why it mattered. Inside, he'd usually be sitting at the table, building something with his toy planes. "Hey, Mom," he'd say without looking up. "Guess what I learned today?" I'd drop my bag and smile. "What's that?" "Planes don't really fly straight. They're always correcting." "That's true," I said. "Even pilots have to make small adjustments all the time." He looked up. "Like people?" I paused. "Exactly like people." He grinned, and I felt that strange mix of pride and ache again, the ache that comes from knowing you're raising someone who didn't ask to be broken but is learning how to heal anyway. A few months later, my commanding officer called me into his office. "Pierce," he said, "we're recommending you for promotion. Major to Lieutenant Colonel. Congratulations." I thanked him, but my mind was already doing math, longer hours, more responsibilities, more time away from home. That night, I told Noah over dinner. "So, you'll be a bigger boss?" he asked. "Something like that." He frowned. "Does that mean less time with me?" I sighed. "Maybe a little, but I'll always make time." He studied me with those sharp eyes he got from our side of the family. "Promise?" "Promise." From that night on, promise became sacred in our house. I never broke one, not even small ones. It was the kind of rule that made sense in both parenting and military life. Your word is your weapon, your armor, and your compass. As he got older, Noah's world started expanding. He joined a youth aviation club. I watched him at the airfield one Saturday morning, sitting inside a trainer plane, headphones too big for his head, smiling like he owned the sky. Captain Moore came up beside me. "Looks like he caught the bug," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Guess it runs in the family." Moore chuckled. "You ever tell him about his mom?" I shook my head. "He knows enough to understand she left. He doesn't need the rest." "That's merciful," Moore said quietly. "It's strategic," I answered. "Some truths don't build, they only destroy." That night, after Noah fell asleep, I opened the old box I kept on the top shelf of my closet. Inside were Amber's letters, just 2 of them, both written in the same impulsive handwriting. I hadn't looked at them in years. The paper had yellowed, but the words still carried that same chill, "He's better off with you." I folded them back up and closed the box. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was heavy, and I'd carried it long enough. What replaced it was something steadier, resolve. Over time, Noah grew into a teenager who made teachers smile and mechanics proud. He could take apart a radio, fix a bike, and once rewired the toaster just because he was bored. When he turned 16, I took him to the base to see the C-130 cargo planes. "These are the real workhorses," I told him. He ran his hand along the side of one. "They look like they've seen stuff." "They have," I said. "They carry everything, food, medicine, people. They don't get glory, but nothing works without them." He looked at me with that knowing grin. "Like you." That one hit deeper than he knew. By then, I'd started mentoring new officers. Many were young women, and I recognized the same insecurity I'd once had. They'd say things like, "Sir doesn't listen to me," or "I don't think I'm built for leadership." I'd tell them, leadership isn't about being loud. It's about being consistent. You can be calm and still command a room. At home, consistency looked different: packing lunches, keeping promises, remembering parent-teacher conferences between mission briefings. There were slip-ups, sure. One night, I forgot to pick him up from soccer practice. He forgave me before I forgave myself. "Hey, you're human," he said. "You saved me. You can't be perfect too." It was the first time he'd ever mentioned being saved. It caught me off guard. "I didn't save you, Noah," I said quietly. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it." He smiled. "Still counts." By the time he turned 17, he started talking about applying to the Air Force Academy. "Are you sure?" I asked him. "It's a lot of work. Discipline, structure, no shortcuts." He grinned. "Sound familiar?" That night, I stood in the kitchen staring at his application papers. My hands shook a little when I signed the parent consent form. It wasn't fear, it was pride wrapped in disbelief. I looked around the quiet house, the same one that had once felt too big, too empty. Now it was filled with purpose, laughter, and life. As I washed the dinner dishes, I caught my reflection in the window, uniform shirt, tired eyes, a small smile. Somewhere along the line, I'd stopped feeling like the sister who was left behind. I'd become the woman who stayed and built something better. Noah walked in, barefoot, holding a piece of paper. "I wrote something for my essay," he said. "About family. Want me to read it?" He shook his head. "Not yet. I'm still working on it." "Okay," I said. "I'll wait." He left the paper on the counter anyway. When he went upstairs, I glanced at it. The first line read, "My mother taught me that family isn't who gives you life, it's who shows you how to live it." I folded the paper back neatly and put it where he'd left it. The kettle whistled on the stove, sharp and steady. I poured a cup of tea, leaned on the counter, and smiled quietly. Duty had turned into devotion. Command had turned into care. And for the first time in years, the future didn't look like a fight, it looked like freedom. There's a kind of peace that comes from routine. Years passed, and life settled into something steady: work, home, quiet evenings with coffee on the porch, and a house that finally felt like it belonged to us. Noah grew into a man right in front of me. He had his father's height, but none of his cruelty. His smile was mine, quiet, steady, earned. When he got his acceptance letter to the Air Force Academy, he brought it to me like a medal. "Mom," he said, standing in the kitchen, holding the envelope, "I got in." For a moment, I just stared. I'd always known he'd aim high, but hearing those words, it hit me harder than I expected. I pulled him into a hug, my eyes stinging. "You did it," I whispered. "You actually did it." He grinned. "We did it." That was Noah, always giving credit where it wasn't needed. He'd earned every bit of it himself. When he left for the academy, the house felt impossibly quiet. His room was still full of paper airplanes and half-finished model kits, but without him, it was just space. I caught myself setting 2 plates at dinner, out of habit, and then putting one back. It was a strange kind of grief, missing someone who wasn't gone, just grown. On base, people congratulated me constantly. "You must be proud," they'd say. I was. But I also felt something deeper, relief. I had kept my promise. I'd raised a healthy, disciplined, kind man out of the ashes of a lie. Every few weeks, he called from the academy. "How's work?" he'd ask. "Same old chaos," I'd answer. "How's cadet life?" He'd laugh. Loud. Competitive. "And they make us run at sunrise." "Good," I said. "Builds character." "You always say that," he'd tease. "Because it's always true." He came home for holidays, and every time he walked through the door, taller, sharper, more confident, I felt that same wave of gratitude I'd felt years ago when Dr. Evans told me he wasn't dying. Every milestone was another miracle. 15 years. That's how long it had been since Amber disappeared with Ethan. Sometimes I wondered if they ever thought of us, or if they'd erased us entirely from their story. The last I'd heard, they were somewhere in Texas. I didn't care to know more. My life had rebuilt itself without them. But peace, like anything, never lasts forever. It started on an ordinary Thursday. I was at the grocery store after work, in uniform, just another errand on another day. I was comparing coffee brands when I heard it, my name. Lauren? That voice froze me. I hadn't heard it in over a decade, but every syllable came back like a bruise resurfacing. I turned. And there she was. Amber. Her hair was lighter, thinner. Her once smooth face now marked with lines life had carved into her. But that same smug tilt to her smile remained, like she thought time had excused everything. Amber. My voice came out flatter than I expected. She looked me over like she was checking a mirror. Wow, she said. You still look the same. Maybe a little more military. I ignored the jab. What are you doing here? Visiting family, she said lightly. And seeing how everyone's doing. It's been, 15 years? 16, I said. Behind her, a man pushed a cart toward us. Ethan. He looked heavier, slower, but still carried that same smirk that used to make my skin crawl. Well, look who it is, he said, eyes narrowing. Lauren Pierce. The saint. The word dripped with mockery. I stood still, gripping my basket. I'd spent years imagining what I'd say if I ever saw them again, but now, standing there in the fluorescent light of aisle 6, all I felt was calm. Amber tilted her head. So, she said, pretending to sound casual, how's that boy we left with you? What was his name again? I stared at her. You mean Noah? Right, she said, as if she'd just remembered a forgotten pet. Is he still around? Ethan laughed, loud and cruel. Yeah, the sick one. He must have died years ago, huh? Something in me snapped, but not in the way they expected. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I smiled. You really don't know, do you? I said softly. Amber frowned. Know what? He's alive, I said. Healthy. Strong. And he's an Air Force cadet now. The silence that followed was almost holy. Amber's face drained of color. Ethan blinked, confused. That's impossible, he said. He was dying. No, I said, voice low but steady. He was starving. There's a difference. Amber opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her fingers gripped the handle of the cart like it might save her from collapsing. I don't understand, she whispered. Of course you don't, I said. You didn't stick around to find out. Ethan's smirk faltered. He's really in the military? Yes, I said. Second year. Pre-med program. He wants to serve. Amber shook her head, like the words didn't make sense. That doesn't sound like him. You didn't know him, I said. You knew the version you broke. For a long moment, none of us moved. The store's hum filled the air, the world continuing as if nothing had shifted, but something had. Amber tried to recover. Well, good for him, I guess, she said weakly. Maybe we did you a favor. You always wanted a family. I met her eyes. You didn't give me a family. You abandoned one. Her lips parted, but before she could respond, a deep voice came from behind me. Mom? I turned. Noah stood at the end of the aisle, tall in his Air Force uniform, holding a grocery bag. His presence filled the space instantly, calm, steady, unshakable. He looked between us, then at me. Everything okay? Amber's breath caught. Ethan went pale. I smiled. Perfect timing, son. Noah's gaze landed on Amber. Recognition flickered, something old and faint. Then, slowly, he nodded. I know who you are, he said quietly. And I remember what you did. Amber took a step back. Noah, He didn't let her finish. Don't, he said. His tone was calm but absolute. You made your choice. Ethan tried to speak, but the words never came. The look on his face, the mix of disbelief and regret, was almost poetic. I rested a hand on Noah's arm. "Let's go," I said simply. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." We walked past them without another word. Behind us, their silence felt louder than any apology. As the automatic doors opened, the warm Alabama air hit my face. I exhaled slowly, like releasing the last ghost of the past. Some debts, I realized, don't need collecting. Sometimes, just living well is the interest they'll never afford to pay. Noah didn't ask questions in the car. He just sat there, calm, watching the road lights flicker across the windshield. That kind of silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was measured, like he was processing every second of what had just happened. When we pulled into the driveway, he finally said, "That was them, wasn't it?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Your biological mother and the man she left with." He nodded slowly, eyes still forward. "They didn't recognize me at first." "They wouldn't," I said. "They were too busy pretending their past never existed." He leaned back in his seat, exhaling through his nose. "I thought I'd feel angry if I ever saw them again," he said. "But I don't." "What do you feel?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Pity." That word lingered. Pity wasn't weakness, it was distance. It meant he'd grown past them. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "You've come a long way, kid." He smiled faintly. "Thanks, Mom." The next morning, the story was already circling around town. Small towns love quiet gossip, and two familiar faces showing up after 15 years was fuel for weeks of whispers. I didn't feed it. I'd learned long ago that silence is stronger than any defense. But silence wasn't something Amber could manage. 3 days later, I was in my office on base when an unexpected call came through. The receptionist's voice crackled on the intercom. "Colonel Pierce, there's a woman here asking for you. Says her name's Amber Cole." I closed my eyes for a second, inhaled deeply, and said, "Send her in." She walked in with the same nervous confidence I remembered, like someone pretending to be calm while standing on thin ice. She sat down across from my desk, crossing her legs like she belonged there. "You still like control, huh?" she said, eyeing my uniform. "Always the serious one." I folded my hands. "What do you want, Amber?" Her smile faltered. "You didn't have to humiliate us like that at the store." "I didn't humiliate you," I said evenly. "You did that yourselves when you abandoned a child." She flinched. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You lied. You left. You made sure I'd believe your son was dying so you could walk away without guilt. I understand more than you think." Her eyes filled with tears that felt rehearsed. "I was young. I made mistakes. I didn't move. You were 28. Old enough to know the difference between a mistake and cruelty." The silence that followed was sharp. She shifted in her chair, looking smaller now, stripped of the charm she used to wield so easily. "Ethan's gone," she said finally. "He left me. After the grocery store." I raised an eyebrow. "So now you're here for sympathy?" She hesitated. "For closure." "Closure," I repeated. "That's convenient. People love that word when the damage is permanent." She wiped at her eyes. "I know I was a terrible mother. But I thought about him every day." "Don't," I said. "Don't insult both of us with that lie. Thinking about someone isn't the same as showing up." She stared at the floor. "I just wanted to see him. To tell him I'm sorry." "He doesn't need your apology," I said quietly. "He built a life without you. You don't get to walk in now and claim redemption." Amber looked up, desperate. "I'm dying," she said suddenly. "Stage 4 cancer." I studied her face carefully. Maybe it was true, maybe not. With Amber, truth was a flexible concept. But her eyes told a different story this time, tired, hollow, genuine fear beneath the act. For a moment, something softened in me, not forgiveness, just recognition of her humanity. I'm sorry, I said finally. But that doesn't change the past. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she whispered. Just a chance to say goodbye. I exhaled slowly. If Noah wants to see you, it'll be his choice. Not mine. She nodded, almost relieved. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said. You might not like his answer. That evening, I told Noah about the visit. He was sitting at the table, reading through his academy training manual, a habit he'd picked up from me. She came here? He asked. Yes. Said she wants to see you. He looked down at his hands. And what do you think? I think you're old enough to decide. He thought for a long time, tapping a pen against the page. If she's really dying, he said finally, then maybe I should let her say what she needs to say. Not for her, just so I can walk away clean. When Amber showed up the next day, she looked smaller than before, her confidence gone. She smiled weakly when she saw him. You look just like. Don't, Noah said quietly. Just say what you came to say. Amber swallowed hard. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. That I made mistakes I can't take back. Noah stood with his hands in his pockets. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You left me to die so you could live easier. Tears rolled down her face. I was scared. You should have been, he said. But not of motherhood, of what kind of person you were becoming. She sobbed openly now, but he didn't move. There was no rage in him, no yelling, just quiet control. That was his strength. I forgive you, he said finally, and her face lifted with sudden hope. Thank you, she breathed. But, he added, forgiveness doesn't mean a second chance. It just means I'm done carrying you. Her face crumpled. He turned and walked out of the room without looking back. Amber looked at me through her tears. He's so cold. No, I said softly. He's free. That night, after she left, Noah sat outside on the porch, watching the stars. I brought him a cup of coffee, mostly milk, just how he liked it. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. You think she meant it? Maybe, I said. But meaning it doesn't erase what she did. He nodded. Yeah. Then after a pause, I don't hate her anymore. That's growth, I said. He smiled faintly. You ever notice forgiveness feels lighter than revenge? I chuckled. That's because forgiveness means you stopped fighting ghosts. He leaned back in his chair, the porch light casting soft shadows across his face. You think she'll change? I looked out at the yard. People like her don't change, I said. They just fade. We sat there for a long time, two silhouettes against the quiet Alabama night. There was no more anger, no more waiting for the past to catch up. It already had. And we were still standing. A week after Amber's visit, everything began to unravel on its own. It was as if the truth had been waiting behind a locked door, and once Noah opened it, the whole structure of her life started collapsing. I wasn't surprised when I got a call from an unknown number late one evening. I almost didn't answer. But something in me knew it was connected. Lauren, a man's voice said. This is Ethan. The name hit like static through the receiver. I didn't speak. I need to talk to you, he continued. It's about Amber. And, about everything. I could hear traffic in the background, the hum of a cheap motel air conditioner. His tone wasn't smug anymore, it was exhausted, cracked. You've got 2 minutes, I said. He hesitated. She's been lying to me for years. About money, about our daughter, about everything. I got a DNA test. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Let me guess. Not yours? Silence. Then a low, broken laugh. Not even close. There it was, the final domino. 15 years of deceit, all crumbling the way every house of lies eventually does. She said you turned Noah against her, he went on. But I saw him that day at the store. That wasn't hate. That was truth. Truth has that effect, I said evenly. What do you want from me, Ethan? He paused again, voice tight. Closure, I guess. I thought I loved her once. I ruined everything for her. For both of you. You did, I said. But the difference is, I rebuilt. You didn't. He was quiet for a moment. You always were stronger than her. Stronger than both of you, I corrected, then hung up. The next morning, when I told Noah about the call, he just shook his head. Guess karma finally found them. It always does, I said. Might take time, but it never loses its way. That weekend, we went to the Air Force Family Banquet, an event that celebrated families of cadets and officers. It was one of those rare occasions where uniforms mixed with laughter, pride, and nostalgia. Noah wore his dress blues, and when he walked across the stage to receive a recognition award for leadership, I couldn't stop smiling. After the ceremony, one of the generals shook my hand. You've raised quite a young man, Colonel Pierce, he said. Discipline like that doesn't come from nowhere. Thank you, sir, I replied. It's mutual. He keeps me steady, too. That moment felt like a full circle. Years ago, I was the woman abandoned with a child I didn't plan for. Now I was a mother standing beside a man I'd helped shape. But fate wasn't done yet. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address. The handwriting was familiar, Amber's looping, inconsistent script. Inside was a single page. Lauren. I don't know how much time I have left. I won't ask for forgiveness again, but I want you to know one thing, I was jealous. You were everything I couldn't be, steady, respected, strong. Keith loved how calm you were, Ethan hated how calm I wasn't. Maybe I hurt you because I couldn't stand living in your shadow. I thought I'd find freedom in leaving, but it turns out you were the one who found it. Take care of Noah. Tell him I'm sorry, even if he won't listen. I hope he never becomes like me, always chasing escape. Amber. I read it twice. It didn't make me angry. It didn't make me cry. It just made sense. Some people destroy others because they can't build themselves. That night, I left the letter on Noah's desk. I didn't say a word about it. He found it the next morning. He came to me quietly. I read it. I nodded. And? He shrugged. It's strange. I thought I'd feel better knowing she regretted it. But I just feel nothing. That's what peace feels like, I said. He looked thoughtful. I used to want her to see who I became. To see what she gave up. But now, I don't need her to. That's growth, I told him. And that's power. Later that day, news spread that Amber had been hospitalized in Houston. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Ethan had filed for divorce 2 days before she was admitted. There was no cinematic ending, no redemption arc. Just a quiet, lonely exit for two people who had spent years running from accountability. Noah didn't go to see her. He didn't need to. Closure doesn't always require confrontation. Sometimes, living well is the loudest silence you can offer. A few weeks later, Noah came home from the academy for a long weekend. We spent a Saturday cleaning the garage, something ordinary, grounding. Halfway through, he found an old shoebox tucked behind some winter gear. Inside were photos from before everything fell apart, me, Amber, our parents, Keith, even a few of Noah as a baby. He picked up one picture of Amber holding him. She looks happy here, he said softly. She probably was, once, I said. Before the lies caught up. He turned the photo over. On the back, in faded ink, it read, "My little miracle." He looked at me. Do you think she ever meant that? I think she did, I said. But meaning something doesn't excuse what you do after. We packed the photos back into the box. Before closing it, he slipped one picture of us, him in uniform, me in civilian clothes, on top. For balance, he said with a half-smile. That night, we grilled dinner on the porch. It wasn't a celebration, just life, simple and uninterrupted. The way it was supposed to be. At one point, Noah looked over at me and said, "You know, I used to think revenge meant getting even. But I think it just means being better." I smiled. Exactly. The best revenge is not needing any. The stars came out one by one, the air filled with the faint hum of crickets. Somewhere, miles away, the past was still unraveling, but here, in this quiet backyard, everything was steady. I poured us both iced tea, raised my glass, and said, "To freedom." He clinked his against mine. And to peace. We didn't talk about Amber again. We didn't have to. Some stories end not with explosions, but with silence, strength, and a steady heart that finally stopped looking back. The spring ceremony at Maxwell Air Force Base was one of those rare days that made everything feel complete. The sun was bright but forgiving, the air crisp with a quiet sense of pride. I stood among rows of parents, families, and officers, watching as cadets lined the field in perfect formation. Noah stood near the front, tall and poised, his uniform pressed sharp enough to cut glass. He had that calm confidence that comes only from discipline, the kind I used to fake in my early years. When his name was called for a leadership commendation, the applause was louder than most. But what got me wasn't the applause, it was how he turned and found me in the crowd, just for a second, and smiled. The kind of smile that said we made it. After the ceremony, there was a small reception in one of the hangars. Music played softly over the hum of conversation. Officers congratulated me like proud uncles, calling him "your legacy." And in a way, they were right. Colonel James, one of the senior commanders, approached us with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "You raised a fine man, Pierce," he said. "You should be proud." "I am," I replied. "But he did most of the work." Noah chuckled beside me. "Don't let her fool you, sir. She ran our house like a military base." James laughed. "Good. The best leaders come from strong foundations." Later that evening, we drove home in silence, not the heavy kind, but the kind that feels earned. The dashboard lights flickered over Noah's face as he leaned back in his seat, relaxed. "Mom," he said quietly. "Yeah?" "I've been thinking about inviting Grandpa and Grandma to my graduation." I glanced at him. "You sure?" He nodded. "They've reached out a few times. I think they regret not seeing me grow up." It had been years since I'd spoken to our parents. They'd chosen distance after Amber's betrayal, too ashamed to face what had happened. I couldn't blame them, but I didn't chase them either. Some wounds heal best with space. "If that's what you want," I said, "I'll support it." He smiled. "I want them to see what family looks like when people don't run away." Graduation day arrived faster than I expected. It was held at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, a crisp blue sky stretching endlessly above the mountains. My parents sat beside me, older and quieter than I remembered. My father reached over during the national anthem and took my hand. "You did good, Lauren," he said softly. "You really did." It wasn't a grand apology, but I didn't need one. His eyes said the rest. When Noah walked across the stage to receive his commission, I felt something inside me settle. The boy who had once struggled to finish a meal now stood among America's finest, ready to serve, to lead, to give back. And in that moment, I realized the story had finally come full circle, not in revenge, not in anger, but in restoration. After the ceremony, reporters interviewed a few of the cadets. When they got to Noah, someone asked what inspired him to join. He didn't hesitate. "My mother," he said simply. "She taught me that strength isn't about how loud you fight, it's about how long you stand." That quote made its way into the local newspaper. The headline read, "From Adversity to Honor, a Son's Tribute to His Military Mother." Amber would have hated it. That night, there was a dinner for the families of new officers. I sat beside Noah as his friends toasted to the next chapter of their lives. Someone joked, "You're gonna make us all look bad, Pierce." He grinned. "Nah, I just had the right training." They laughed, and I realized he wasn't talking about military training. He was talking about life. When we got back to the hotel, there was a small package waiting at the front desk, no name, no return address. Inside was a worn silver bracelet. On the back, engraved faintly, were the words "For my little miracle." Noah turned it over in his hand. "It's hers," he said quietly. "Amber's?" He nodded. "I guess someone found it after she had passed away 2 weeks earlier, alone in a hospice facility. Ethan had signed the paperwork and left. There was no funeral. No obituary. Just an ending that came quietly, as if the world had already moved on." I looked at the bracelet for a long time. "What do you want to do with it?" He slipped it into his pocket. "Keep it. Not for her, but as a reminder of where I came from, and where I didn't stay." That answer said everything about the man he'd become. Back home, life slowed down again. The house that once echoed with loneliness now felt warm, full of photos, medals, and memories. On one wall, I framed Noah's graduation photo beside an old one of me in uniform. 2 soldiers, 2 survivors. A few months later, he got stationed at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas. The same state Amber had once run to. I asked if that bothered him. He shook his head. "No. I think it's fitting. It's like reclaiming the ground." When he left for training, the porch light stayed on every night until I got his "made it safe" text. Some habits never fade. One Sunday morning, I stood outside with my coffee, the Alabama air heavy with summer heat. I looked at the sky, the same sky Noah once dreamed of flying through as a boy, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. People always think revenge is about making others suffer. But real revenge is quieter. It's living well, building something strong from the ruins they left you. It's knowing you didn't just survive, you thrived. I thought about the years between Betrayal and now, the long road from chaos to calm. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every quiet victory. Then I smiled, whispering to no one in particular, "Mission accomplished." The wind carried the words away across the yard, soft and certain. Inside, the coffee pot beeped, and the smell of breakfast filled the kitchen. Life moved forward, steady as ever. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like the woman who had been left behind. I felt like the one who stayed, and won. I never thought I'd hear from Ethan again after Amber's death, but life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. One morning, I received an envelope marked "Confidential" at my office on base. Inside was a subpoena. Ethan Cole was being investigated for fraud, and I'd been listed as a potential witness. Apparently, during those years with Amber, he'd used company funds to cover their expenses, vacations, cars, even medical bills that never existed. The investigation had started after a whistleblower exposed years of falsified reports. I stared at the papers, the old fury I thought I'd buried flickering to life, not for revenge, but for justice. The kind that doesn't shout but stands quietly, waiting its turn. That afternoon, I called the military legal office. "If they need testimony," I said, "I'll cooperate fully." The trial was set in Dallas. By the time it began, Ethan's face was all over the local news. The once smug businessman now looked hollow, cornered. His lawyers tried to frame it as poor bookkeeping, but the evidence was stacked too high to climb out. When I walked into the courtroom, heads turned. Maybe they expected drama, but I wasn't there for that. I wore my uniform, pressed, simple, unshakable. I wasn't the woman he left behind 15 years ago. I was Colonel Lauren Pierce. When I took the stand, the defense attorney tried to sound casual. "Colonel Pierce, you were once married to Mr. Cole, correct?" "Yes." "And after your divorce, he left the state?" "He ran," I corrected. "There's a difference." The courtroom chuckled softly. Ethan shifted in his seat. The attorney tried again. Did you have any involvement in his business or finances after that? None, I said. But I do know he was never short on cash. He spent plenty keeping appearances with the woman he left me for. That line landed like a shot. Even the judge's eyebrow twitched. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he tried the old charm. Lauren, we were young, he said, voice shaking just enough to seem human. We made mistakes. You made choices, I said calmly. Mistakes can be fixed. Choices have consequences. He lowered his eyes. For once, he didn't argue. By the end of the trial, the verdict was clear, guilty on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Sentenced to 8 years, no parole for the first 5. I didn't celebrate. Justice isn't fireworks, it's paperwork and silence. Still, when the judge banged the gavel, I felt something heavy unclench inside me. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. One asked, Colonel Pierce, any comment on the verdict? I adjusted my cap. Only this, integrity is the currency that never loses value. Some people spend it too easily. That quote made the evening news. My CO sent me a text later, Pierce, that line should be on a poster. When I got home, Noah was sitting on the porch with a folder in his hand. He looked up. You went? I did, I said. It's done. He nodded, then handed me the folder. I thought you should see this. Inside was a copy of a letter he'd written to the Air Force's Community Outreach Board. He'd requested to mentor at-risk teens, kids who'd been neglected, abandoned, or written off. He'd written, I'm here because someone refused to let my story end where it began. I looked up at him, speechless. He smiled softly. Figured I should pay it forward. I touched his shoulder. That's not repayment, Noah. That's legacy. Weeks passed, and life fell into rhythm again. Ethan's name disappeared from headlines, Amber's memory faded into history, and our days became simple, morning runs, weekend coffee, and phone calls that always ended with love you, Mom. But sometimes, peace brings perspective. One evening, as we sat outside watching the sunset, Noah asked something that caught me off guard. Do you ever wish you'd taken revenge? I laughed quietly. What do you think I did? He frowned. You didn't destroy them. You didn't yell. You just moved on. Exactly, I said. That's the point. Revenge isn't about making someone hurt. It's about making them irrelevant. He thought about that for a long time. I guess I just wanted to see you angry once. I said softly. But anger's loud and short. Dignity lasts longer. He smiled. You always turn everything into a lesson. Occupational hazard, I said, sipping my coffee. The next day, I received a letter from the Department of Defense, confirmation of my final promotion before retirement. I read it twice, sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd once cried over Amber's note 15 years ago. It felt poetic, almost full circle. When I told Noah, he hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. You deserve it, Mom. So do you, I said. Every part of this life, you earned it. That weekend, the base held a small farewell ceremony for me. Officers from every division showed up, pilots, logistics officers, even the cooks who kept everyone alive during deployments. Captain Moore gave the speech. Colonel Pierce has taught us more than strategy, he said. She's taught us that leadership isn't commanding, it's caring. And sometimes, caring looks like standing tall when everything around you falls apart. I smiled, fighting the lump in my throat. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I joined the Air Force to serve, I said. But life had other plans. It taught me that service isn't limited to the uniform, it's in every choice you make after the storm. The applause echoed through the hall. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. That night, after everyone had gone, I walked through the empty hangar alone. The floor gleamed under the floodlights, the hum of distant planes filling the air. I thought of every moment that brought me here, the betrayal, the boy, the battles. And standing there, surrounded by silence and steel, I realized something simple but absolute: revenge doesn't need witnesses. It only needs peace. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain. Somewhere, far above, a transport plane took off, climbing into the dark sky. It was headed toward tomorrow, steady and unshaken, just like us. The morning of my retirement felt strangely ordinary. The sky over Alabama was soft gray, the kind that promises rain but never delivers. I poured my coffee, fed the dog, and sat on the porch the way I always did, quiet, steady, unhurried. Only this time, there was nothing left to prepare for. For the first time in 30 years, no one was waiting on my orders. Noah arrived before noon, knocking once before letting himself in. He was in uniform, the crisp kind of formal that still made me straighten my shoulders. "You ready, Colonel?" he teased, holding out a bouquet of white lilies. I smirked. "You know I hate flowers." "I know," he said. "That's why I brought them. Tradition." We drove to the base together, both silent for most of the trip. When we pulled up to the hangar, I saw the banner, "Thank you, Colonel Pierce, for your service." Someone had even added a small line beneath it, "and for your strength." The ceremony was simple, just the way I wanted it. No speeches about sacrifice or medals, no dramatics. Just a few words, a few salutes, and a slow lowering of the flag. When they handed it to me, folded perfectly into a tight triangle, I held it with both hands. The weight of it wasn't heavy, but it carried every version of me that had fought to survive. Afterward, a young airman asked to take a photo with me. "You're kind of a legend here," he said nervously. I laughed. "If I'm a legend, it's only because I stayed long enough to outlast the gossip." That night, Noah and I had dinner at a small diner off the highway, cheap food, strong coffee, and peace. He raised his glass of iced tea. "To your next chapter." I smiled. "To yours." We clinked glasses, and for a moment, it was just us, the soldier and the son who shouldn't have lived long enough to see any of this. After dinner, we drove to the old neighborhood, just to see it one last time. The house where Amber had left Noah all those years ago still stood, though the paint had peeled and the yard had grown wild. The new owners had replaced the front porch swing with a metal bench. Time had erased the traces of us, as it should. Noah parked the car and looked out the window. "Feels smaller," he said. "Everything from the past does," I replied. He turned toward me. "Do you ever think about her?" I paused. "Sometimes. But not the way I used to. I think about the lesson, not the person." He nodded, understanding without needing details. "I used to imagine different outcomes," he said. "What if she'd stayed? What if things had gone another way? And what do you think now?" He smiled faintly. "I think she left so I could find the right mother." That one hit me harder than I expected. I looked away, pretending to watch the road. As we drove back toward Montgomery, the sun began to set, gold bleeding into deep orange, the kind of sky that makes you feel like life still has miles left in it. I thought about all the things that had brought us here: betrayal, survival, quiet rebuilding. Every wound, every scar, had led to something worth keeping. When we got home, Noah opened the door and froze. There were people inside, our neighbors, a few colleagues from the base, and Captain Moore, grinning like a man caught in mischief. "Surprise," he said. They'd organized a small farewell gathering. Nothing fancy, just laughter, a few toasts, and a cake that said, "Mission complete, Colonel." Moore raised his glass. "To Lauren Pierce, who proved that leadership isn't about power, it's about endurance. You didn't just serve your country, you rebuilt a life when others would have given up." Everyone clapped, but I just laughed. "You're making me sound like a recruitment poster." "Good," he said. "The young ones need one that's real." Later that night, after everyone had gone, the house was quiet again. Noah and I sat on the porch under a sky full of faint stars. He looked at me and said, "You know, this story would make one hell of a movie." I smiled. Too long. No one would believe half of it anyway. He leaned back. That's the thing, though. It's not the drama that matters, it's the recovery. He was right. The real story wasn't about betrayal or punishment. It was about endurance, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just keeps showing up. I looked at him, the man who had once been a starving, scared little boy, now wearing the uniform I'd once worn, and felt something deep and still settle inside me. "You did good, Noah," I said softly. He looked at me with that same small smile he'd had as a kid. "You too, Mom." The cicadas sang low in the background. A gentle wind rustled through the trees. It wasn't a grand ending, but it was a complete one. Inside, the folded flag sat on the mantel, next to a framed photo of Noah at graduation. Beside it, I placed the old silver bracelet with the faint engraving, "For my little miracle." Not as a tribute to Amber, but as proof that even broken things can become symbols of something better. The clock ticked quietly in the living room. I took one last look around, the kitchen where Noah had learned to cook, the hall where we'd argued about curfews, the doorway where he'd hugged me before leaving for the academy. Every inch of the house carried a memory, but none of them hurt anymore. They just existed, proof of a life fully lived. I turned off the lights and sat back on the porch. The moonlight cast a silver glow across the yard. It was peaceful, steady, final without feeling like an ending. Somewhere in the distance, a jet rumbled through the clouds, climbing higher and higher. I watched its faint light trace across the sky until it disappeared. And in that silence, I realized, this was victory. Not loud, not dramatic, but earned. The kind of victory that doesn't need applause. Because the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's honor. It's love. It's peace. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, or walked through the ruins of what used to be your life, remember this. Peace is the final victory. And if stories like this speak to you, real, raw cheating stories, powerful revenge stories, and journeys that turn husband betrayal into strength, subscribe to the channel, hit like, and leave a comment below. Your story might just help someone else find their way back to peace.